We all set? All right. The meeting will come to order. This is a little awkward because we don't have a chair currently, but with your two's consent, I'll just kind of run through some of the initial agenda items until we get to that portion of the agenda. First, let me welcome the two new commissioners. I don't know if either of you wanted to say anything just to start out, or we can go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your welcome. My name is Andy Doctoroff. I look forward to serving on this body. I think it's got a very important oversight mission, and I look forward to doing it in an open-minded and independent manner.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Webb, and I'm happy to be on this commission as well, and I'm looking forward to how I can assist.
Okay. Our first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If we have a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve.
All right. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. Second item, approval of the October 12 meeting minutes. I've always thought in sitting on public boards that it's awkward approving minutes of a meeting that you did not attend. But from my perspective, they're a fairly accurate recordation of what happened. So I'd entertain a motion to approve them.
I make a motion to approve the.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. We have no old business, new business. We handled briefly the introduction of the new authority board members. If you guys want to expand on your comments or your introductions, this is the time to do so. Otherwise, we can just go into the next item. Okay. The next item is authority board chair election. Do we have a motion for appointment of a chair?
I'm happy to move for the appointment of you as the board chair.
Okay. All in favor or any discussion?
I think that you are the member who has been on this body, not the two of us, and I trust in your good faith and your knowledge and expertise that you've developed at this point, and therefore I think you're in a good position to serve as chair.
Well, thanks, at least as to the good faith part. The knowledge and experience is probably subject to question, but any discussion or comments? Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Now I feel less awkward about actually running the meeting. It seemed presumptive of me up until now. We'll go to the next item, which is the summary of MSCA oversight role and authority. And Ray Howd, the authority's legal counsel, is set to begin that discussion.
Good morning, Member Doctoroff, Member Webb, and Chairman Novak. The statute that created the authority was Public Act 359 of 2018. The statute amended the Mackinac Bridge Authority Act and added a couple of sections that pertain to the authority board. The statute does not set forth in detail what exactly the responsibilities and the duties are for this board. In the closest that it comes to is in Article or MCL. Give me a second here. 254.324A. And that section provides that the authority shall enter into an agreement with Enbridge, well, it doesn't say Enbridge, it says with a private company, if the board is satisfied that certain criteria have been met. And those criteria are, let me get the statute itself. And I know most of you are probably already familiar with that, but just to kind of go over that criteria. In section 14D4, the governor was to provide this tunnel agreement, which was provided at the December 2018 meeting, and the agreement needed to comply with the provisions in the statute, that it allows for the use of the utility tunnel by multiple entities, that the proposed tunnel agreement requires gathering of geotechnical information before construction to ensure that the tunnel is feasible, and that the proposed agreement provides the Mackinac Straits Port Authority with a mechanism to ensure that a utility tunnel is built to sufficient technical specifications and maintained properly to ensure a long asset life and secondary containment for any leak or pollution from utilities using the tunnel. It is that provision that I believe most closely defines what the authority's role is. And the governor presented a memo at the very first meeting detailing how the tunnel agreement complied with that section. So, in a memo from the governor's office dated December 17th, the governor listed some provisions in the tunnel agreement that would satisfy this. And Article 6 talks about a project description, and the project description requires that the tunnel be designed and constructed in accordance with prevailing state-of-the-practice tunnel standards and specifications for a design life of no less than 99 years and be constructed of a suitable structural lining, providing secondary containment to prevent any leakage of liquids and prevent the leakage of any liquids from the replacement segment into the lake bed or the straits. The project specifications found in section 7.2 of the tunnel agreement provides that the authority and Enbridge will identify members of a team to jointly develop the project specifications related to design and construction of the tunnel. And the jointly developed project specifications were submitted to the authority for approval. And Dr. Mooney will provide more detail on those specifications. Section 7.5 addresses requests for proposals and contracting strategy. Those must be consistent with the jointly developed project specifications. There's an independent quality assurance contractor provision in section 5.3 and throughout, where Enbridge will supply the funds for the contracting with an independent quality assurance contractor with appropriate technical expertise to monitor the construction of the tunnel and provide information to the authority. That is in process now. The beginning steps have been laid to develop a procurement document to find out or to put out for bid to get that quality insurance contractor. The progress of construction is section 7.8 in the tunnel agreement. And that requires that Enbridge provide to the independent quality assurance contractor and any other designated representative of the authority the all necessary information necessary for the standard of practice quality assurance. So Enbridge will be sharing documents and allowing site inspections throughout the construction phase. There's a construction completion provision in section 7.11, and that requires that the tunnel construction has been completed in accordance with the project specifications and that the tunnel's been commissioned and is available for normal, safe, and continuous operation pursuant to the tunnel agreements and in accordance with these project specifications. So those are the primary provisions that provide this authority board with oversight of the construction and the operation of the tunnel and the pipelines.
Thanks. Any questions for Ray?
I have some questions, and if that's okay.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. I have some questions, and I'm not expecting all of them to be answered today in this forum. But I'll preface my questions with just a statement that I do believe that this is mega infrastructure project that's extraordinarily complicated, that has a huge impact on the health, welfare, and safety and well-being of Michigan for obvious reasons. And I also believe that oversight of these types of projects has to be meaningful. It can't be faith-based. And what I will be asking is to make sure that there is a shared understanding of what the tunnel agreement does say and what it allows when it comes to this entity's being fully engaged, meaningfully engaged in oversight, such that it is not a perfunctory or a box-checking exercise. And for example, I am aware that we will not be a party to any project agreement between the ultimate concessionaire or construction company that is retained to build the tunnel pursuant to the RFP process and Enbridge. Yet that project agreement will have, potentially significant impact on Michigan. I, of course, am aware in the tunnel agreement the provisions about the project specifications and that those have been incorporated, that they have to be incorporated into the ultimate project agreement. But my question to you with that background, Ray, is given what the tunnel agreement says, do you feel that it fully fleshes out what our oversight responsibilities are such that we can ensure ourselves and the people of Michigan that the oversight will be appropriately robust, well-modulated, working as a partner with other stakeholders, as opposed to, as I said, performing a perfunctory box-checking role?
Yes, I do, Member Dr. Off. Again, we're still in our early stages right now because there is still the Army Corps of Engineer permitting process and the Public Service Commission permit process that's ongoing. And so at this point, we are in a stage where we are working closely, and Dr. Mooney will be able to provide more because he's been the primary consultant and the liaison between Enbridge and the board. I think that independent quality assurance contractor or firm that is ultimately retained is one that will be working very closely with Enbridge's quality assurance and will be ensuring that the construction and the materials used and that the project specifications are in fact being complied with.
Yeah. My question is going to be, and we'll deal with this later in the meeting, is one of what resources are in fact necessary, what type of dialogue is in fact necessary with Enbridge and other entities to make sure that the oversight role is performed in a way that I think is necessary and serves the interests of our state and protects the state. I guess my question is so that this board can get a better understanding of the oversight role, and your recitation of provisions was very helpful. is, do you think that it would be, does this board think that it would be helpful for a written itemization of oversight provisions, responsibilities, so that we can better understand those provisions and what they do and do not say? For example, I'm aware of many provisions in the tunnel agreement, or certain provisions in tunnel agreement, saying that we have access to information. But what about an obligation or a commitment by Enbridge to consult with this board on issues that may arise in our minds after having access to that information? I'm not sure that the tunnel agreement addresses that, and I think it would be helpful to have something that, you know, distills what the oversight provisions are, so that we can get our head around where our oversight powers and rights are, and what might need to be discussed, and what, you know, powers we don't have. Because I think without a real understanding of what our oversight abilities are and expectations are, it'll be difficult for us to have a shared understanding of how we proceed from here, recognizing that we're still in the permitting phase. So that my question is that something that we think as a board would be helpful or not?
I do think it would be helpful. When I came on this board a year ago, I suggested that we have kind of an informal study session that enabled us to not only receive comment and presentations from interested stakeholders, but also to have just an open-ended discussion of some of the technical aspects of the project, of its construction, etc. We did not drill down on, I think, what you're identifying, which is what are the different provisions, whether they be in the statute, whether they be in the tunnel agreement, whether they be in the arrangements with independent quality assurance contractor, that enable us to perform the oversight role, that provide whatever points, inflection points that we may have at different phases of the project.
Yeah.
To make determinations of the appropriateness of what is being implemented. And I think having kind of a segment of time that is devoted to an open-ended discussion of that would be helpful.
You know, I work on a project right now, the Gordie Howe International Bridge project, where oversight is obviously critically important. And I've come to believe that oversight is not just what's written in a contract, but also what evolves from good faith partnerships that develop with stakeholders. I believe that no contract can necessarily identify all the parameters of what oversight is appropriate under certain circumstances, and that it's something that is more of the art than science, but it is something that is very important. And therefore, I would appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, if we were to, you know, engage in that type of inquiry and discussion, and hopefully a writing that would form the framework for that discussion, so that we could do our job in a way that doesn't overreach, but still recognizes the role that this board has to play.
Yeah, I think those are well-stated comments, and when we get further down, maybe in terms of developing an agenda for a future session, having a segment that specifically addresses both the statutory and contractual obligations and rights that we have for performance of the oversight role, and also maybe overlaying that on the different milestones,
Right.
so that we have an understanding as to sequence, and what may appropriately be engaged in or evaluated at different anticipated milestones. So having both of those items presented as part of a study session, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, and I would think that Enbridge and others ultimately would be welcome participants in that conversation, because it takes two to tango, and you know, it's oversight includes lots of conversations with parties to contracts that impact this. Enbridge obviously has a very strong role, and ultimately that would include whoever the contractor is, to flesh out what oversight means on this project. But I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, you're saying that type of inquiry at this point would be helpful for us.
Well, and we do have the luxury, I'll call it, of a little bit
Yeah.
of time by virtue of the permitting processes that are in front of us. And using that luxury appropriately and constructively, I think will enable us to better hit the ground running in the event that those different permitting and evaluation phases that are being performed by other regulatory agencies give the green light to the continued pursuit of the implementation of the contract and the construction of the project.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that, Member Doctoroff, it's going to be excellent having your experience with the Gordie Howe Bridge, and the board will be is very lucky to have your thoughts coming in going forward.
Thank you.
Other questions for Ray? All right, why don't we move into section 5.4 of the agenda, the project background and status, which I think we envision having a joint presentation from Ray, Ryan Mitchell, Dan Cooper, and Mike Mooney, as well as representatives of Enbridge.
Chairman Novak, this presentation will be primarily given by Dr. Mooney, with the other members available for questions or any additional comments.
Good morning, Chairman Novak, members Webb, Dr. Off. My name is Mike Mooney. I will give an overview. Ray and Ryan asked me to give a brief background on myself, so I'll keep it very brief. I'm also, in addition to being a consultant to the MSCA, I'm a Grucock Chair Professor of Underground Construction and Tunneling at Colorado School of Mines. I head up the graduate degree program in tunnel engineering. I think we're the only program in the U.S. that specifically trains engineers in tunnel engineering, as well as run a center for research on the topic, and have worked on dozens of, in various roles, on dozens of tunnel projects around the world. So I'll give a very brief overview of, just to catch everyone up on the tunnel that extends essentially from 4 miles long from the South Shore to the North Shore. So here is the tunnel cross-section. Just walk you around this. So this is a 21-foot, I should say, preface this, this is the design tunnel from Enbridge and its team, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the design tunnel includes a 21-foot inside diameter tunnel. You see that here. You see the 30-inch diameter pipeline in this location. You see the general cross-section, or space proofing as we call it, of the actual inside of the tunnel. There's the location up here, space that's allotted for third-party utilities that's been designed into the tunnel, which is part of the tunnel agreement. The liner for the tunnel is a 15-inch thick reinforced concrete, high-strength reinforced concrete lining. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. What you also see in this particular cross-section is a structural floor, which, let me move this if I can without logging off, everyone. This is a structural floor that's only in the deepest portion. This enables the sump location here for infiltration water to collect in the bottom, and then there'll be sump pumps here to move that water out of the tunnel. There is a footprint here for or a vehicle clearance zone for a service vehicle to move up and down the tunnel when they need to go in and provide maintenance on the tunnel, on the pipeline. So that's sort of the cross section of the tunnel. That liner I was talking about, that 15-inch reinforced concrete liner, is essentially a precast segmental liner system. And we can't get very far into a tunnel presentation without some nice videos of tunnel boring machines. So forgive me for that. I'll have a few of these, but it really helps you to visualize what happens. So this is a tunnel boring machine. This is not the tunnel boring machine that would be used on the Great Lakes Tunnel Project. This is simply to illustrate that as the tunnel boring machine moves through the ground, it installs this permanent lining, or this permanent tunnel, essentially, as you see in this animation. So these are segments that are pieced together into what we call a ring, and these rings are approximately 6 feet long. And so you see a ring here being assembled, and then really installing a tunnel is a series of installing these rings. Excavate 6 feet, pause, build a ring, excavate 6 feet, pause, build a ring, and repeat that for roughly 20,000 feet. On the right-hand side here, you see the segments. This is just a stack of one ring of segments. These segments, as I was saying, they're precast. They're made well in advance of the tunnel construction itself. And as you see on these segments, there's these gaskets. They're on the inside and the outside of the segments, and as they assemble that ring, they'll push those, the ring assembly process will push those gaskets together, and that double gasketed segment really provides the resistance to the groundwater infiltration, and also any resistance to if there were a product leak from it moving through the gaskets or moving through the joints of the tunnel. So now once that liner is essentially assembled into a ring, you see this grouting, annulus grouting process. So again, this is sort of the rock, this is the liner, you see the segments there. As the tunnel boring machine advances, there's an annulus 4 to 6 inches of cementitious grout that really locks in the rock to the liner. So you end up with 15 inches plus, let's say, 4 to 6 inches of annulus grout that provides the overall structure for this tunnel. The structural piece, though, being just the segmental lining. So that's the process of what the actual tunnel lining looks like. And I bring this up because that's the permanent structure. That precast structural concrete, that's what's designed for a 99-year service life. And that's the permanent structure that will essentially be owned by the authority, the MSCA. On the right-hand side up top, that's just the finished look of a typical tunnel. And then in the bottom-hand side, you see another tunnel there. And I point this out because you do see occasionally you'll see some water infiltration into tunnels. And in the case of the the Great Lakes Tunnel Project, there is a specification, a provision that limits the amount of water ingress to 7,000 gallons per day. And so if we boil that down to per minute, that's basically 5 gallons per minute over the 4-mile length of tunnel. So that, think of our Home Depot 5-gallon bucket, or think of just a garden hose is really sort of producing 5 gallons per minute type infiltration rates. And so that sump system I showed earlier on here will capture that infiltration water. That will be then pumped out and through a treatment plant before discharge. So the alignment of the tunnel, this is the bird's eye view from the south shore to the north shore. And if we look at the south shore station of the tunnel, you can see, again, I'm going to have to move this up. You see a plan view here of a portal structure that will be constructed to launch the tunnel boring machine. And the tunnel will be constructed from the south shore to the north shore in one linear path. You see the tunnel there, and then the tunnel boring machine will launch from this location. If we look in a vertical cross section, you can see what it looks like from this picture. This is a portal structure I was referring to. That's some 400 feet long. Tunnel boring machines and their trailing gear are quite long, so need that length. And then the tunnel essentially initiates from the bottom of that portal shaft. There's the ground surface that you can see. So this is some on the order of 60 to 80 feet deep where this launches. Oops, excuse me. This is just a 3D rendering from Enbridge and its team on that portal structure that launches from the south. You can see in the shadow there, that's the tunnel boring machine, the trailing gear. And then when that construction is done, this will become much smaller, and then this will be the structure that remains. So at the end of the project, you see there's a structure on the ground surface. This is the ground surface. You have a structure on the ground surface, and then you have this rectangular shape that goes down to the tunnel level. See the tunnel level there, and there's the pipeline that comes out. The blue is the ventilation stack needed at both ends of this tunnel, and then other utilities that go in and out of the tunnel. So this larger box here is temporary. Ultimately, the footprint will be this building on the surface. If we now go to the north shore, looking at this area here, you can see that the tunnel boring machine, or the tunnel, will end in a circular shaft, and that shaft is on the order of 65 feet in diameter. If we look at a cross section of that shaft, you see here essentially the tunnel ends there. The tunnel boring machine enters into the shaft, will be pulled out of the ground in pieces, and then that shaft will be completed with a structure, if I move this up here, a structure that looks very much like what you see on the south shaft. So this ground surface is here, building on the surface, ductwork for ventilation into that tunnel, etc. So the tunnel becomes enclosed buildings on the north and the south shore that are secure. So that's sort of the overview horizontal alignment of the tunnel. You can see I didn't mention up here, this is essentially the horizontal alignment of the tunnel from south to north. When it's all done, this is just a schematic of the sort of operations or facilities that will be inside the tunnel in terms of mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So this just shows the north shaft, the North Straits building and the South Straits building. The blue, light blue, is the ventilation ductwork the stacks from the surface on both the north and south shafts. That provides air ventilation for when workers need to go in and perform maintenance in the tunnel or inspection in the tunnel. And then you also see electrical power in red, the utilities, the tunnel, of course, itself, and the dewatering system. So the sump pump that's in the middle that I showed earlier on that will pump out any infiltration water in the tunnel. Sorry, this mouse is quite jumpy. Very jumpy. All right, let's try this again. All right. Now shifting a little bit to the vertical alignment of the tunnel. So let me move this over here. So again, this is the plan view. This just shows from south to north. All these circles are the geotechnical boring log locations that were performed back in 2019 to capture geotechnical information, geological information to design the tunnel. And then in the bottom plot, the middle plot is a 2-scale vertical profile of the tunnel. So you can see in very faint black here, this is the tunnel alignment. And then this is an exaggerated view, so you can see a little bit better. So from the south shore, you can see the tunnel dives immediately through various rock formations. The green is the Bois Blanc rock formation, then it moves into the St. Ignace rock formation, and then down into the pink Pointe aux Chênes rock formation, where the tunnel stays for the majority of the time underneath a buried, this is the old Mackinac River, buried river section of soil. Listed here as overburden, but translation, that's just very dense, glacially derived soils that are packed. And so the tunnel will stay in rock below the bottom of that buried river channel, and then essentially come back up to the North Shore. So in terms of elevations, you can see the lake levels around 580 feet, and bottom of tunnel is approaching 20-30 feet. So it's good 560 feet deep to get to the bottom of the tunnel from the lake level. And you can see the distances below the lake bed, hundreds of feet, and the distance below rock interface here is typically on the order of 20 to 30 to 40 feet. Sorry, a bit more detail. As Enbridge and its consultants, Arup is the designer of record, went through the process of designing the tunnel. As is typically done, multiple potential alignments were pursued, were explored. So this just shows their exploration of 3 different tunnel alignments. So they looked at an alignment that would go through the river, the buried river channel. You can see there's 2 of those alignments in the blue and the red. And I'll say tunnels are built every day, every year through soil, through rock. So it's not extreme whatsoever to build a tunnel in soil. Below water, there's 2 tunnels being built through soil underneath water bodies right now in Virginia, road tunnels. So they looked at all 3 of those and ultimately decided on the gold one here that goes below. The boring logs I mentioned, the drilling, the geological or geotechnical drilling that I described earlier, these are shown by these vertical stick figures that show essentially the information that they learned from the geotechnical exploration. I will also point you to, there's a very good, well-documented information session that was recorded in September of 2021, where Arup and WSP go into great detail about the decisions and the process by which the alignment was selected. So it's a very good informational piece there. All right, the last video I will mention, I'll just come back to this. So one of the important, again, apologize for the jumpy mouse, or my operation of the jumpy mouse. So when tunneling, the rock conditions, you can have fractures in the rock, you can have intact rock. If you have fractures in the rock, which do exist through this rock and many rock formations, you can create water pressure at the tunnel elevation. So the tunneling process, when the tunnel boring machine gets this deep, it can feel the effects of that water pressure, 550 feet of water pressure. And so the tunnel process has to be able to handle that. And so the prescribed, specified method for tunneling on the project is what's called slurry pressure balance tunneling. And this video just illustrates this process. This is called the cutter head. This grinds away at the rock. It's just an animation, so it's just want to be clear that that's not the actual cutter head for the machine. But what you see here is a chamber filled with slurry. It's bentonite slurry. It's 97% water, and 3% bentonite clay, which is a natural clay usually pulled from Wyoming and mixed with water and used in the process. That bentonite slurry is pumped to the face in this red pipe here, and it's pressurized. And it's pressurized at the pressure of the water that's in the ground to counterbalance that water pressure, which prevents water from flowing into the tunnel. That pressure then applied by that slurry pressure balanced tunnel boring machine counterbalances that groundwater pressure and also any sort of earth pressure that might push on the face. We call this front part the face of the tunnel boring machine. So here you see the rock chips are coming in. This is just an animation. They come down here. Again, you apply face pressure throughout this operation for stability through the ground. The fresh bentonite slurry is pumped in with one pipe, and then this blue or purple pipe shows the cuttings or the excavated rock in the slurry that is pumped out to the surface. When this gets to the surface, the rock chips are separated from the slurry, and all the soil, the excavated material is separated from the slurry, and that is washed and cleaned and then taken away and disposed of or placed where Enbridge has selected locations to take the rock material. And then the slurry is recycled back into the tunnel and used throughout the entire tunnel process. So that's the process of slurry pressure balanced tunneling. And this is what really enables this tunnel to be constructed, is this face pressure balance. Okay, so now moving more away from the technical aspects and more to the procurement approach and project team, just a brief update on these two pieces. So initially, the project procurement approach was a construction manager general contractor model, or CMGC. And this is where, and you see the parties involved in this. Just for reference, the tunnel agreement was established in December 2018, and the CMGC approach was established in 2019. So Enbridge, as the project execution team, the owner of the tunnel until it is accepted by the authority, hired WSP as its owner's engineer, hired Arup as the design engineer of record for the tunnel, and then the important part of CMGC is to hire contractor to provide construction manager services. And Enbridge hired Great Lakes Tunnel Constructors, which was a joint venture between Obayashi, North America, and JD of Livonia, Michigan. And so I just want to pause there and just mention WSP and Arup have world-class firms in tunnel design. They design and work in complex tunnels all over the world. And both Obayashi and JD are very reputable tunnel construction contractors. So this team that they put together was a very good team to bring forward the project to design. The benefit of CMGC is to have a contractor involved during design, because the construction aspects of building this tunnel play a major role in how you design the tunnel. So for example, the alignment that was chosen to remain in rock was really predominantly dictated because of constructability reasons. So that was a very important and valuable way to essentially move through the design process. So throughout 2020, Enbridge and its subs essentially completed the design process. Arup is the designer of record for the tunnel. And then Enbridge and the CMGC contractor, Great Lakes Tunnel Constructors, agreed to not continue towards building the tunnel in 2021. That's kind of an off-ramp clause in a CMGC procurement approach. So then Enbridge switched to a design bid build model. They had 100% design. So this is now the current situation. So WSP and Arup remain in their roles. And now Enbridge is in the process of reviewing and selecting a construction contractor to essentially build the tunnel. And I think they'll provide an update on that in a little bit. So that's kind of the procurement approach. Just a summary of tunnel agreement milestones, piggybacking a little bit on what Ray introduced earlier. So this table describes the milestones and deliverables. Sorry for being quite wordy with this, but you'll have a record of this, so it's a good reference. The milestones are numbered in the left-hand column. Those numbers are not in the tunnel agreement. They're really just there for convenience. So you can see these. I'll just go through them if you don't mind, one by one. The first one is the preliminary engineering activities work plan. Has a due date per the tunnel agreement. It was submitted in 2019, and MSC action. I've got a column here on MSCA action. In this case, approval was not required per the tunnel agreement. Item 2 was to identify a joint project specifications team. That was submitted in 2019, and MSCA board approved that. Number 3 was a draft procurement and contracting execution plan. That was submitted first in 2019, and then an addendum in 2021 because the contract model switched, the procurement approach switched from CMGC to design bid build. Approval was not required on the draft procurement and contracting execution plan. Number 4, draft procedures for establishing escrow accounts. This was submitted and the board approved that in 2019. Number 5 is the geotechnical data report, and that's just a factual record of all of the boring logs, all geotechnical information, geophysical information that was collected in order to design and construct the tunnel. That was submitted per the tunnel agreement back in December of 2019. Number 6, they completed the preliminary engineering activities. That was stipulated in the tunnel agreement to be done by April 2020, and Enbridge submitted their notification of completion of those. So that's items 1 through 6. Moving on to 7, 8, and 9. Number 7 is the draft RFP to design and construct the tunnel. The due date for that was April 30 of 2020. Enbridge submitted in August of 2019 the draft RFP for designer and CMGC contractor, so 2 separate RFPs. This is consistent with the CMGC approach. The MSCA concurred that both those RFPs complied with the tunnel agreement. And then also Enbridge submitted an October 1, 2021 draft RFP for construction contractor. The MSCA board also concurred that that RFP complied with the tunnel agreement. Number 8 is filing for government approvals and permits to begin construction. That was to have been completed per the tunnel agreement 180 days after the geotechnical, that should say data report. My apologies for that. I'll change that. The Enbridge submitted the 3 different permits. First one is the joint permit application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Eagle. Second, the MPSC permit application, and third, the NPDES permit application to Eagle. So those were submitted per the tunnel agreement requirement. A note on that, the MSCA approval is not required for those. The MSCA board voted to not file jointly for permits. The tunnel agreement allowed for joint permit application, but the board voted to let Enbridge do that solely. Number 9 was to submit the jointly developed project specifications. The due date was not stipulated, but those were submitted in December 2020. And then modifications or edits to those submitted in both June 2021 and June 2022. All of those have been approved by the board. I'll speak to those a little bit because those are quite important to quality assurance of the tunnel. Okay, final table, 10 through 13. Really, these are forthcoming aspects. So number 10 would be to begin tunnel construction, and that's just stipulated as no later than 180 days after receiving permits. Number 11, the draft tunnel construction execution plan. Date's not stipulated, but of course we presume that's before construction. Number 12, providing documents and access to the IQA, the Independent Quality Assurance Contractor. The schedule's not stipulated for that in the tunnel agreement, but a memorandum of understanding was developed in 2022 to begin to spell out the roles and responsibilities and presumably timeline of that. And then 13 here is the tunnel completion report. And the important piece there is that's where, per the tunnel agreement, the MSCA is to inspect the tunnel to confirm constructed in accordance with the project specifications and the construction, the tunnel construction execution plan. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a summary of the kind of key milestones, deliverables to date, and then what's forthcoming on this. Joint developed project specs. I just want to describe that process, what those are first of all. So the scope of this, project specifications include really the technical requirements for the tunnel, as well as the construction specifications for the tunnel. So technical requirements convey performance requirements such as the design service life of 99 years as specified, allowable water infiltration limits, tunnel-induced settlement limits, noise and vibration, as well as design requirements as stipulated in the tunnel agreement. So minimum diameter, the requirement of a structural liner, accommodation of third-party utilities, prevention of any pipeline liquid leakage into the lake bed or straits, all those sort of design requirements. That's the technical requirements. Then the technical requirements also identify the prevailing codes and standards to be adhered to during design. So ACI, American Concrete Institute, the AASHTO, State Highway and Transportation Officials Tunnel Design Guide. This is not a state highway tunnel. However, that's the most evolved and documented national kind of federal code for tunnel design. So it's always a reference regardless of the type of tunnel that is being designed. The International Tunneling Association guidelines and National Fire Protection Association codes and standards. So that's laid out as requirements in the project specs. So the jointly developed project specs team includes a number of staff from Enbridge, Arup, and WSP. And then the MSCA's joint spec team included myself, Ryan Mitchell, Matt Chenoweth, MDOT's chief bridge engineer, was key part of the joint spec team until he left MDOT in mid-2022 and was replaced with Rick Liptak. And then two additional consultants, Mahmoud Khwaja from CDM Smith and Ehab Darwish from Alfred Manesh. The joint specs team involvement occurred via a really formal comment resolution process. This began with a full team kickoff workshop in 2020, and then weekly conference calls throughout the year in 2020. All right, so the key piece of the joint specs is they include 10 construction specification sections that pertain to the permanent tunnel structure that the authority will ultimately assume ownership of. So these are listed all there. This is the structural concrete materials, cast in place concrete, precast concrete tunnel lining, sealing leaks. So a prescription or specifications on how to seal leaks that may occur. Excavation by the tunnel boring machine, because it has a lot of clauses regarding tolerances for installation of the lining. Board piles, diaphragm walls for the north and south stations or shaft and portal, and then earthwork excavation and backfill. So real briefly here, I want to just describe the process. This is documented. I wrote a series of reports over the 4 years that sort of describe this in detail. And I think all those are on the MSCA website, but I think it's important to just describe this. So Arup prepared each draft of these 10 project spec sections, beginning at the 60% design level, which is typical for project specifications. The joint spec team conducted a detailed review of each section to ensure concurrence with the tunnel construction best practice and Michigan construction practice. The spec team from the MSCA submitted point-by-point written comments to each spec section, requesting either additions, modifications, deletions, and clarifications, or concurrence. Arup addressed each one of those comments by written response. For example, accepting the comment, modifying the spec language, answering queries, questions, explaining rationale, etc. This happened often through weekly meetings. The MSCA joint spec team reviewed each comment response. Comments were closed if the response was deemed acceptable, and then were continued if further discussion or action was required. Arup did the same thing at the 90% design level, and then the same thing at the 95% spec level, where everything was resolved. So altogether, nearly 400 comments were brought forward by the MSCA joint spec team, and each comment was successfully resolved. All right, last part here, just to summarize, is the independent QA of tunnel construction. So as Ray introduced earlier, I just wanted to put the clause here. Per the tunnel agreement, 5.3 stipulates independent quality assurance contractor, essentially to retain IQA contractor with appropriate technical expertise to monitor the construction of the tunnel and provide information to the authority. So not very detailed, needs to be fleshed out a bit, and that was fleshed out via this memorandum of understanding regarding IQA between the MSCA and Enbridge. And that was approved by the board in February of last year to establish 3 things. 1, the parties' mutual understanding for how quality assurance will be completed and coordinated during tunnel construction. Number 2, the independent QA contractors and the Enbridge QA team's QA roles and responsibilities. How will those 2 QA efforts work together? And then 3, additional requirements necessary for the parties to facilitate the QA during tunnel construction. And then just jumping off of that, the MSCA is on schedule. Ryan can probably speak to this more than I can, to issue an RFP for the IQA contractor perhaps this year. Okay, so with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Can we have a 5-minute break, and then we'll open it to questions? Okay, thank you. All right, we're back in order. Any additional questions or discussion with Mike Mooney? Go ahead.
Kimberly, do you have any questions? I just have a few questions, Dr. Mooney. And first of all, thank you very much for your, very thorough, helpful presentation. Just a lot of these questions are born in ignorance right now, simply because I am not familiar with so many aspects of this project and people's relationship to it. Did the MSCA select you to be the independent? I'm blanking on your title.
Yeah,
The
tunnel consultant.
Yeah. So the MSC retained you? Was it our decision?
Yeah, good question. I think Dan and I both came on board when the agreement, the December 2018 agreement was put in place. Whether the MSCA selected us or not, I don't know specifically the answer to that. But just as background may be helpful, there was a feasibility study conducted in the year 2018 looking at tunneling versus horizontal directional drilling versus trenching and then backfilling, 3 different options for the pipeline. And so I participated as a tunnel expert, and Dan Cooper participated as a pipeline expert in those feasibility studies on behalf of the state of Michigan. And then when this shifted over to when the MSCA was formed, we were asked to continue as experts.
Okay. Could you just, again, for background, because I am aware that per the tunnel agreement, Enbridge is paying for your services, but could you give us a general description of your working relationship with Enbridge and talk about your independence?
Sure. Sure. I haven't worked on a project involving Enbridge prior to this project ever in my career. Didn't really know anyone from Enbridge. So my only experience working on a project involving Enbridge is this tunnel project.
Member Dr. Off?
Well, I was going to interject briefly if I could, Member Dr. Off. So just to clarify, and I'll go over this in greater detail when I talk about resources. Okay. It'll help clarify. Dr. Mooney is a consultant to the state. Okay. And so he was selected after Dr. Mooney and Dan Cooper were actually contract employees to the state.
Okay.
In support of the feasibility study that determined the tunnel was the preferred alternative. They were selected by the state prior to the MSCA board.
That's important to know.
Appointments. But I just wanted to clarify that Enbridge does not pay for Dr. Mooney's services, nor Dan Cooper's services or any independent consultant work for supportive development of the project. They will pay into an escrow account funding for the independent quality assurance contractor. Yes,
Got it.
So, and I'll explain Public Act 618 of 2018, which establishes the Straits Protection Fund. So, just importantly, the only state funding that can be utilized for this project has to be derived from the Straits Protection Act, or fund rather, and I'll explain that later. Just really quick, I know it's a fine point, but
the key thing that I wanted to establish is that he is indeed independent. He is our expert. He is not necessarily, unless he deems it in his professional expertise, to be affected by it. He's not swayed by Enbridge's opinions or conclusions. These are his own independent conclusions that are derived on behalf of the state of Michigan.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure of. So just getting to the project and your description, again, these are questions that I've just been curious about since I've been appointed to this board. Is there anything in your professional opinion that you consider singular about this project, or particularly difficult, or in contrast, would you suggest that this project is more of a conventional tunnel boring project, notwithstanding the attention it has received here in Michigan?
Yeah, so when I think about tunnel projects, you think about the ground conditions, you think about the geometry, the length, and then the depth. And so from a diameter perspective, this is small compared to the biggest tunnels built. Tunnels are approaching 60 feet in diameter. This is 20, roughly. The length of the tunnel is 4 miles. That's well within lengths of tunnels that are constructed. The depth of the tunnel per se is not excessive, but the water pressure is as high as a tunnel project has been constructed.
Okay.
So the depth of water and what that translates into something 550 feet of water, which we call 17 bar. That gives you 17 bar of water pressure. That is that will be the highest water pressure, or equivalent to the highest water pressure that tunnels have been constructed in or designed for. Just as a basis, previous project, a New York round out water tunnel project, which was recently completed, was designed to experience 20 bar of water pressure, but they never experienced that 20 bar. A Lake Mead intake water tunnel was recently completed, where they experienced close to 13 bar of water pressure. And so this being 17 bar is really pushing that envelope on the water pressure that the tunnel will experience. So that's the unique thing,
Okay. Thank you.
complex thing about this project.
And I was noticing in your presentation, there, was the borer, but there were no men or women working in the tunnel in your animations. Is that in fact going to be the case? Will there be people
Yes.
working in the tunnel during construction?
Yeah, really good observation. I was going to mention that. So there are absolutely people working in the tunnel, and just to point to this one slide, I think this will illustrate it. So this chamber up here and this chamber are under pressure. So these will be under high pressure. There's no people in there during operations. As soon as you get back here and all the way back to the opening of the tunnel is atmospheric pressure, 21-foot inside diameter. There will be people working in the tunnel, operating the tunnel boring machine, assembling those segments that build the rings. So crews can be on the order of 5 to 15 people working in the tunnel consistently.
Okay. And something else I've been curious about, just conceptually, when the tunnel digging is going on, is it safe to assume that there's no way that those activities can in any way impact the existing Line 5s? Meaning they're completely separate and independent from each other, and one shall not affect the other. Is that fair or not fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And I should say I was corrected during a break that the tunnel alignment is offset. One of the slides says it's below the western pipeline. It's actually offset from the westernmost pipeline. And
Okay.
it's much, much deeper than that. So
I
there
just
should be
wanted to
no
make sure in terms
interaction.
of my conceiving this. And then getting to where we are in procurement, is it safe to say, in summary, that the procurement process is now, leaving aside the permitting issues, the RFP has been issued, correct? Or it hasn't been issued?
It has been issued.
And there have been, consortiums or entities that have responded. Is that correct or not correct?
Yes, yes.
How many?
Well, what I can do is I'll allow Enbridge to maybe comment and give an update specifically on those issues.
Sure. I just want to know where we are in the procurement
Yeah.
process. And wherever you want.
Either is fine.
Yep, thank you for your question. And I'm Anna Mooney. I'm Government Relations Manager here for Enbridge. So thank you for having us here today, and frankly for all the background that Dr. Mooney already laid out. But where we are in the RFP process right now is we did issue the RFP. We should be under contract here, be able to award be in a position to award that contract by the end of this year. Per the agreements, as Dr. Mooney said, there is an opportunity for the MSCA to observe that process, but we are under that review right now of those bids, and we do have 3, to your question, qualified contractors that have submitted.
And did 3 submit, or are those the?
3 that are under review.
They're under review.
Yes.
How many submitted originally?
I don't think I have an answer for that,
Okay.
but if that's something we can
And
get you.
You know, to what extent is there an overlap between the RFP drafting process and the ultimate project agreement? Will they, I mean, to what extent will the, I guess the better question is, will the project agreement mirror or expand on the RFP? How many additional terms and provisions will be in there that are not right now contained in the RFP or fronted in the RFP? Will it be, yeah.
Yeah, the RFP as it was drafted, and again with working with the technical teams and with the corridor authority providing oversight during that process, it does mirror the project agreement. I can't speak to further, probably until we get under contract. I don't think at this time I can. That's something I can come back to you with.
Like, for instance, does the RFP address issues like quality management, systems, quality control? Are those in the RFP? So, or are they yet to be determined will be included in the PA project agreement?
Yeah, I believe those are things that are, yes, included in the RFP, yes. Sorry, I'm looking at my attorney here who is also
they?
much closer to it.
Okay, because my question is, does Michigan in the RFP process have a role in determining things that will be in observing or commenting on, I guess is a better term, things that will be in the project agreement, such as QA, such as quality management, so that we can have faith in those critical issues and other critical issues.
Yeah, maybe I'll tag Dr. Mooney in to help with that answer.
Yeah, remember, Dr. Off, absolutely. The tunnel agreement requires or allows for the authority to participate. So we did participate in a review of the RFP to make sure it was compliant with section 7.5, Ray, correct me, 7.5B, Roman numerate I through 1 through 5, one of which was quality management procedures. And so there are a number of clauses in the RFP that we reviewed and made sure that they include quality management practices for quality assurance. I did write a very detailed memo of all the provisions in the RFP that sort of connect to quality and design and et cetera, so I can provide a copy of that.
That'd be great. Is it within, I guess I'll ask you, is it within our authority or rights to review the RFP responses? Is that something that you contemplate as our role?
Yes, the agreements allow for the observation of the corridor authority and staff, I think, during this process, and which is again currently underway right now.
And what do you see as this authority's role, if any, when it comes to participating in the formation, drafting, discussion of the project agreement itself? I mean, obviously, we're not going to be a party to that agreement, but we will be in many ways impacted by its terms and its execution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in your opening comments too, the importance of this infrastructure project for the state of Michigan, right? And your role as a body that was, created to play that oversight during the, construction and operations of the tunnel that that the state will ultimately have ownership over. So I think there is a role to play for the authority, and I think that was contemplated again in those agreements that are set forth with the state and Enbridge, and I think the partnership that Enbridge has with the authority and all of your staff is really critical and continue to move forward this incredibly important infrastructure project.
And could you describe a little bit more about where you are right now in the review of the 3 bids that are being analyzed?
I cannot.
Okay.
Again, we're reviewing those three, qualified competitive bids, and hope to be should be in a position to be under contract by the end of this year.
Have the makers of those competitive bids been publicly identified?
No.
Do we know who they are?
Do
The
you
MSCA?
That's probably a question for maybe Ryan.
Yeah, so remember, Dr. Mooney has participated in review of the responses and has participated in technical discussions around those. So
Okay.
he is aware of those. Yes.
And Dr. Mooney, how much time are you these days contributing or spending on this particular project? How deeply are you invested in the reviews that are being described?
Yeah, so for the actual RFP of the tunnel construction contractors, I reviewed very carefully each of the three proposals submitted in great detail. The technical aspects, not so much the commercial aspects,
Okay.
and then attended meetings where there was interviews with follow-up questions to those three proponents of the construction of the tunnel, and that occurred in January of this year, so not more than 6 weeks ago. And so I was very involved in reviewing the proposals, making sure that they're hitting on all the key risk items in this project throughout that process or period of time.
I'll just say, as a bookmark, just for future consideration, then I'm done with my questions. Like, I know that we had the right to agree to, and we did agree to, the project specifications that are in turn going to be incorporated into the project agreement, which are obviously reflected in the RFP documents. My question is going to be, in my mind, to what extent are there other terms and conditions in the project agreement that meaningfully impact Michigan that we did not weigh in on, such that we want to have conversations, if appropriate, about those terms and conditions as well. Your presentation, Dr. Mooney, clearly, strongly suggests that we're comfortable and we have reason to be comfortable with the project specifications. But are there other terms and conditions that will appear in the project agreement that impact Michigan that we have not yet weighed in on or vetted with professional or technical expertise? That's a question that is just circulating in my mind right now, swimming around there. But we can discuss that another time.
Member Dr. Rupp, I just wanted to bring your attention to the tunnel agreement 7.5C. And that, after the obtaining the authority's concurrence that the RFP was acceptable, which has already occurred, then Enbridge will release the RFP. Enbridge will select any contractors provided that designated representatives of the authority be authorized to observe the contractor selection process. The authority will have the right to review any contracts entered into by Enbridge and tunnel contractors to verify that the contracts comply with 7.5B1
Which is
through
the project specifications.
qualifications of the proposed contractors, jointly developed project specs, a statement of the authority are not subject to any financial risk, commercial structure, keep progress reports, change management procedures, and that the proposed contractors provide a plan of how they intend to engage Michigan's.
Right, I get all that.
Okay.
That's more than project specifications, but it's not the whole ball of wax, so to speak. And, there is the right to review, but what does it mean to review? Does that mean consult? Does that mean engage? Does that mean, and that's the thing I assume we'll be working on to make sure that we have a good partnership. That right to review actually is a meaningful right to review and comment and consult. Fair enough? As an issue identification?
I would say that's fair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to burden you with those questions.
Thanks. Member Webb, did you have any questions okay. Was there anything else in Vision that was going to be presented as part of the project background and status? Or are we ready to move on to the oversight resource assessment presentation from Ryan?
Sounds like we're ready.
Presentation is generous. Summary hopefully will suffice. We talked a little bit about the origin of the services that were initially provided. They included Dr. Mooney and Dan Cooper, our pipeline expert, and they had been involved in the projects as contract state employees previous to the Public Act 359. Along with Public Act 359, Public Act 618, which was the appropriations for the, in this case, within Section 118 of Public Act 618, line item for State Transportation Department appropriation summary, the line titled one-time appropriations. The Mackinac Straits infrastructure project was funded for $4,490,900. Public Act 359 contemplates the Straits Protection Fund. This essentially funds it. So, as I mentioned before, member Doctoroff, there's a limitation on state funding, and it has to be the only funds that can be expended from the state are from the Straits Protection Act. Just want to clarify that again. We do have a contract with Michael Mooney Consulting LLC for a value of $495,305.02. It was initiated in December of 2018, and it extends to December of this year. $368,339.53 has been expended to date, with a remaining balance of $108,965. Dan Cooper, employed by HT Engineering, providing advisory pipeline tunnel engineering, has the same origin date of 12/28 of 2018, and it expires the same as Dr. Mooney's on 12/27 of 23. The contract has a value of $309,000. It's $41,000 have been expended, with a remaining balance of $268,000. In addition to Dr. Mooney and Dan Cooper's services for the project, we did contract with an independent tunnel advisory consultant, and the reason for that was due to the nature of the Straits Protection Fund being the only source of funding, and other state agencies having work related to the project, including EAGLE, that's Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and the MPSC, the Michigan Public Services Commission. And I apologize for the trouble with that acronym. They were something else prior to this, to present times. But anyway, Delve Underground, formerly McMillan Jacobs, was hired to provide independent services for tunnel analysis and permitting analysis related to this project. Eagle issued a permit for the project, and they were supported by McMillan Jacobs, now Delve Underground. Their project was valued at $247,000, about $248,000. They've expended $134,000 with a balance of $113,000. To support MDOT, during the joint spec development, CDM Smith was hired to advise from a technical perspective on structural design, concrete design, Michigan concrete expertise, and some tunneling expertise as well, tunneling construction expertise. Their contract was valued at $228,000. They expended $29,000, and they have a remaining balance of $199,000. So that is a summary of resources that we currently have. And to just give you an overview of our remaining balance of funds. As I mentioned, $4,489,900 were appropriated originally in Public Act 618 of 2018. We have obligated $1,250,000, 345, with an unobligated balance of $3,198,000. Sorry for the the torrent of numbers there. I gave you this in writing, and appreciate any questions. Glad to respond to any questions.
Are there continuing services that are anticipated to be provided under the CDM arrangement, or are those primarily done? I ask that only because of the end date referenced for the arrangement.
Yes, and a good question, Chairman Novak. It's actually a question I'd like to ask the board. It's a bit of a long story, but MDOT requires that firms are pre-qualified to do certain services. One of those services is the classification is complex bridge. CDM Smith no longer carries that pre-qualification, and so when their contract elapsed, they were not eligible for renewal. It elapsed. The services that CDM Smith provided under that contract would be helpful in the way of continuing review of changes to the joint specifications. However, we would need to, I guess, to really, there are other firms that could provide that service.
Okay.
And since they no longer carry that pre-qualification, I would leave it to the board as to whether we should retain a similarly qualified firm.
Mm-hmm. And then as to the others, it looks like we will have contract renewal or replacement inflection points coming up later this year.
Correct.
We should also put Ray Howard on that list, because I know we had that end-of-year issue last year. Hopefully we can address it more gracefully this year.
That's a heads up, Ray. So a good point, Chairman Novak. We will, because Ray's services are to the Attorney General, it's just a different contract vehicle, but definitely will, as these get closer, bring them to your attention for approval.
Yeah, and have a bridge that enables him to work under contract rather than just on the faith that his contract will be renewed.
Yes, Member Novak, and my hourly rate is $150 an hour, and it was based on the October meeting. There was a motion that approved of the renewal of my contract, and that the prior chair would sign so long as the Attorney General had agreed to it, and that contract was executed, I believe it was in early December, prior to the expiration of the terms of Chairman Maestro. I can provide you a copy. But yes, I would appreciate having the contract in place before it expires going forward. Thank you.
Anything further on that topic?
No.
Kimberly, you have a question? I just have a couple. First of all, I think it would be good for all of us to hear, Ryan, what your background is, because I know that MDOT has really relied on you and will continue to rely on you to help us out. So could you just say a few words about who you are and what expertise you have?
Happy to, Member Doctoroff. So my background was in vertical construction originally, and working in hospital construction in the early part of my career, in the trades, actually in construction. I apprenticed and went to school and learned vertical construction methodology and alternative delivery from very early in my career. So that means design, build, and CMGC for, at that time, vertical construction. I went to work thereafter for the Nevada Department of Transportation, where we initiated an alternative delivery program for roadway and bridge construction for large civil infrastructure projects, delivering that type of project for interstate highway and bridge construction, design, build, and CMGC, or CMAR, Construction Manager at Risk, as they call it in Nevada. From Nevada, I went to Texas to work in large P3 contracts for similar types of infrastructure, highways and bridges, mostly concession-style projects where the contractor was at risk for the financial success, the commercial success of the project. And from Texas, I came to Michigan to work at MDOT and I deliver the state's alternative delivery program, which includes design build, P3, CMGC, and now progressive design build.
Thank you. I just thought it was important for people to know your background, given our reliance on you. Do you, Ryan, have a vision in your mind at this time? Obviously, everything would be subject to board approval, of how we are going to spend going forward the balance of the budgeted monies, which, according to this, looks like it's $3 million plus. If so, what is that vision?
So I think we don't need to spend it all, first would be my response. But yes, how will we use that funding to deliver the project? I think the principal purpose of that funding for the remaining between now and construction completion will be the independent quality assurance contractor. I think additionally, it may be wise to retain a transaction advisor to evaluate the contract, since we are at liberty to do so. Mm-hmm. And to your point earlier, remember, Dr. Off, to review any potential residual risk to the state emanating from those contracts. And then as that is fleshed out, I think the independent quality assurance contractor will incorporate the construction quality assurance requirements of as set forth in the tunnel agreement, but also included in the RFP and the agreement for construction.
And just so I appreciate it, in terms of retention of the independent quality assurance contractor or a transactional advisor, which I assume would be a law firm familiar with these types of project agreements, but famous last words, what is the process, or what would be the process for retaining those entities?
Did you ask about the transaction counsel? I'm sorry.
I asked
both.
about both.
So for the independent quality assurance contractor, that's pretty straightforward. In fact, myself and others at MDOT and Dr. Mooney and Ray have drafted an RFP for those services. Mm-hmm. At the time, this was when we thought the project would require an EA, not an EIS, so an environmental assessment as opposed to an environmental impact statement. And so since such time, that's kind of not been backburnered, but just a pause on that effort until we were closer to the contractor selection process. But that is fairly straightforward. We would those services would include interaction with the contractor team, evaluation of contractor team deliverables to ensure that their plan for shadowing, so to speak, the construction efforts were adequately covered in their scope. and so that they could mirror those quality assurance activities performed by Enbridge's contractor and be present on the site and prepared to receive the documentation of that information so that they could then essentially serve as the arbiter for the construction quality, and in the end they actually do perform a dispute resolution function.
And how many people would be part of that team?
Good question. It's a very large, long-term construction effort. We've talked about this, and I think it's a staff of between half a dozen and a dozen people on site, and then others supporting that effort from a desktop perspective.
And what about the theoretical retention of a transaction advisor?
So a little different with respect to Michigan law. That can be a little thorny. Commercial advisory services are potentially allowable, and maybe Ray's the right person to ask this question. I'll go as far as I can, and then I'll hand it to Ray. But in Michigan, you cannot. You would have to hire a SAG. Generally speaking, SAG rates what they are. They are. It's tough to get that kind of service because those are usually performed by very specialty firms, as you know.
Yeah.
It's called the Frank Kelly rule.
So, do you want to elaborate on that? I think you understand what I'm saying,
I
Andy.
do
But
understand what you're saying,
I-
and that's a tough nut to crack, right?
Mhm.
Ray, any thoughts on that one? We're talking about retaining the services of a transactional advisor or a law firm who knows how to, meaningfully review a 1,000+ page project agreement and know how to look at it and give us advice as to what is in there and what the concerns might be.
Yes, really, it could be any firm that meets those qualifications, and then the Attorney General would appoint the members that would work on that as a Special Assistant Attorney General. And since the Attorney General wouldn't be responsible for the payment, I think that would be a very easy process. They typically don't have like a proposal or a bid to get that out, but I don't want to speak out of turn if that is a process. As you're aware, there are Special Assistant Attorneys General that work on the Gordie Howe Bridge, especially in the condemnation area and the litigation, and they are not bound by the hourly rate that I am. But they, whatever the market rate is, would be something, and just to get Attorney General approval for, to make them a Special Assistant AG, and then I don't see it as a difficult process.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I did have a question. So the independent quality assurance contractor says that Enbridge will provide the funds for that. So is that additional funds into the Straits Fund, or I guess how is that, or is it the current funds we have right now?
No, a good question. Thank you, Member Webb. The funds for the IQAC, the Independent Quality Assurance Contractor, will be deposited into an escrow account, and MDOT will be reimbursed by that escrow account for payment to the IQAC. Funds will be deposited by Enbridge into an escrow account. So no, it does not. It would not come from the Straits Protection Fund.
Other questions? All right. Our next agenda item is status of MPSC contested case proceedings. Ray, do you want to describe in general the, if you want to describe, well, let me interrupt for a second. First, do we have any members of the public here who would like to participate in public comment? Okay. And I say that only because I envision that we would go into closed session to discuss the MPSC contested case proceeding. And we would come out of that closed session, but I don't want to, if there is a member here from the public who wants to present, to necessarily make them wait for that, although they're certainly entitled to wait for that and then to observe the remaining proceedings after that. So I guess what I'm saying is, as the only one who has expressed interest in presenting in public comment, would you like to do it now, or would you like to do it after the closed session?
I can do it after the closed session.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to give you that opportunity if you wanted to front end it. All right. Then back to the MPSC contested case proceedings. Mr. Howard, do you want to describe the process by which you envision it appropriate for us to go into closed session on this?
Yes, I had planned just to give a little bit of a background on the proceedings. Enbridge filed its permit application with the Public Service Commission on April 17th of 2020. There was and I'm skipping all the minutia, this is a lengthy docket. On August 12th of 2020, following the PSC asking for as many participants with interest to intervene in the case, on September 14th, 2021, I'm sorry, August 12th of 2020, the ALJ granted a motion to intervene for the Michigan Attorney General, and that's separate, not us, For the Love of Water, FLOW, the Michigan Environmental Council, Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, National Wildlife Federation, Bay Mills Indian Community Environmental Law and Policy Center, Michigan Climate Action Network, Little Traverse Band of Odawa Indians, Nottawasepi, Huron Band of Potawatomi, Michigan Laborers District Council, Michigan Propane Gas and National Propane Gas Association, and the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. We became interveners at that time and have, for the most part, had a sit-back attitude, or not attitude, but we have laid low, if you will, and not been actively involved, with the exception that in September of 2021, the authority submitted the direct testimony of Dan Cooper and Dr. Mooney, who opined that there is a public need for the relocation of dual pipeline currently laying on the bottom of the straits, that the proposed tunnel and the relocated pipeline within the tunnel will be designed and routed in a reasonable manner, and that construction of the tunnel and replacement pipeline will satisfy applicable safety and engineering standards. So once that brief was filed after the taking of, there was a rebuttal testimony in December of 21, the matter then went to the Public Service Commission. Last July, the PSC issued a 45-page order that reopened the record on various, there was some concerns or some gaps it thought was in the testimony concerning possible explosions within the tunnel and Enbridge's secondary leak detection system, how quickly the detectors can sense the amount of natural gas liquids. On page 46 of the opinion, the commission said, well, since we're not really in a hurry because of the Army Corps process, let's reopen the record and supplement it as best that we can. And so then Enbridge filed its direct testimony on remand, if you will, just before the first of the year. And the authority, well then on February 3rd, several interveners filed direct testimony, and the authority did not file any direct testimony. And the court set a rebuttal testimony on March 10th of 2023. And so one of the issues that the authority would consider, based on a motion that was adopted at the last meeting, was that before the authority files any substantive pleadings in the PSC proceedings, that it will get concurrence of the board. And so I provided you with a memo that kind of outlined proposed rebuttal testimony, and that that document is protected by attorney-client privilege and would therefore then be the subject of a closed session.
Okay, thank you. Any questions before I entertain a motion to go into closed session for purposes of discussing the attorney-client privileged communication from Mr. Howard? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session for that purpose.
I'll do that. I move that the board meet in closed section under Section 8H of the Opens Meetings Act to discuss the authority, with the authority's attorney, a written memoranda he provided concerning possible rebuttal testimony in the Public Service Commission proceeding on Enbridge's permit application that is protected by attorney-client privilege and exempt from disclosure under Section 13, paren 1, close paren, open paren G of FOIA.
All right. It's been moved. Any discussion?
I think there's,
All
it
right.
says it should be a second. Did it have to be a second?
Yes.
It's gotta be second.
Yeah, I move, second it.
All right. Unless there's discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
All right. At this point, we will go into closed session for the purpose described in Mr. Doctoroff's motion. We'll have to vacate the room for, or we can. Oh, that would be way more efficient.
That is better.
All right, the meeting will be called back to order. We are still on agenda item number 6, which is the status of MPSC contested case proceedings. Do we have a motion?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. I move to approve the filing of rebuttal testimony incorporating points made in the Ray Howard memorandum dated February 28, 2023, and any other information deemed material by the MSCA pipeline expert Dan Cooper,
Okay.
by no later than March 10.
Okay. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Oh, you want to second?
I second it.
I got to tell you, I am not a stickler for seconds, especially on a 3-member
right.
thing. I mean, I know it's a Robert Rules thing, but I don't think we necessarily have to be governed by Robert's rules, and I always thought seconds were superfluous.
I'm with you.
Unless you tell me as my lawyer that I have to. Okay, so the motion passes. We are now at public comment.
You know, before we go to public comment, I had a basic question. I figured I'd ask it here rather than about the timing of, maybe this is to Enbridge, the timing of what's going on with the Army Corps of Engineers and the EIS, and how long that'll take, and what you're hearing about that lead agency's involvement, and whether it's going to be 6 months or 5 years.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as indicated in the slides earlier, we applied for that permit in April of 2020. And so we are currently, I think it was also indicated they're working through an environmental impact statement, so an EIS process. So we are in the process of trying to advance that permit with the Army Corps. We're not aware of a new schedule. I think, that question's really to the Army Corps and what that timing is.
Mm-hmm. So do you have in your mind, do you have an understanding as to when there could be a record of decision?
Not a firm timeline beyond what the Army Corps has already published,
And
on
they
their
publish
website.
what, just so I know?
I think currently they listed at 2024 for a record of decision on their website. They have a Line 5 EIS website.
And you're generating the EIS?
There's a third-party consultant on behalf, that the Army Corps hired to do that.
So the Army Corps is the lead agency, but tell me about your relationship working with the Army Corps in generating an EIS.
Yeah, so we're working very closely with the Army Corps, our staff, regular, meeting, submitting information, constant, frequent, I should say, data requests and information that we are responding to, in a timely fashion to meet those timelines, and then again in every effort to advance that permit.
Can you characterize, and don't if you can, the tenor or nature of these discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers as lead agency? Do you think it's going smoothly, amicably?
I don't think I can, appropriately characterize
Okay.
that. I think we're working very closely, and I think our technical staff and their technical staff meet on a regular basis.
Okay, I just wanted to hear, that helps us contextualize our role,
Yep.
right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And actually, I skipped an item before public comment, and that is proposed public meeting dates for 2023. Ryan?
Yeah, and thank you, Chairman Novak. Not to lock these down or put pressure on anyone, but just in the interest of public transparency, we like to throw some dates out as early as we possibly can, both for the benefit of scheduling and for transparency, as I say. We have identified potential dates for future meetings, just fixed dates. That wouldn't, it's not to say that we couldn't have additional meetings as necessary, but Monday, June 5th has been identified as a possibility. And Typically, we meet in St. Ignace, as close to the site as we possibly can. But also, due to weather, other times of the year, it's better to have, closer to Lansing. But also Detroit is a possibility elsewhere in the state, I should say. So June 5th has been identified as a possibility for a meeting in St. Ignace. And Wednesday, October 11th, we've traditionally met in October in Lansing, but that's not obviously fixed for any reason. So those are the two that have been identified as targets, and leave those to your discussion.
What was the October date?
Wednesday, October 11.
11.
And again, Lansing was a convenient location for the state because there's a very good facility just for sound and broadcasting there. But members can determine what the appropriate location to meet is, of course.
I have a personal preference. I'm scheduled to be in trial starting in early October. Those dates are always subject to move, but I think I should at least operate under the assumption that I'll be in trial for that month. Would late September be doable? And if so, any particular dates?
Now you're asking me to go off script. So, and actually, the state resources that evaluate location availability, we'll take a look at that, but I have no reason to doubt that late September would be perfectly fine.
Okay. And Ray, actually establishing dates for meetings is one thing where Open Meetings Act is not really an issue, if I recall it. In other words, we can confer with each other solely for the purposes of figuring out what days are available that we can meet. Is that fair?
That's correct, as long as
Okay.
no decisions or deliberations.
Right. We're
Yep.
just talking about, can we meet on X date? So why don't we, if it's okay with the two of you, target something in late September? And for that June meeting, maybe we also consider whether we want to have an additional session over the summer or not. Particularly given what the posture is of your guys' permitting reviews and stuff, we might want to step it up a little bit. That's also not to say we couldn't meet before June, but if the other members have a preference to do so. But I think maybe getting that broad production, so to speak, at a June meeting would be a good start to really get our feet wet more in the process. And one of the things that I would anticipate being on the agenda for that session is a much more detailed review of upcoming milestones and the type of more detailed review of our role in the processes as contemplated in the tunnel agreement, the statute, the IQA provisions, and IQA contract, and whatever other governing documents might be looked to for purposes of understanding our oversight role in more detail.
And I know that, Mr. Chairman, there's been some talk about issues reducing this type of analysis to writing, but a writing, I know there's been some discussion about the utility or issues arising out of reducing this analysis to writing. I know I would benefit from something in writing to kind of crystallize that oversight vision, if you will. So to the extent that you guys feel comfortable doing that, I personally would appreciate it. And maybe it's something we could have in advance of the meeting so that we could discuss it at the meeting. Again, if there are legal or other concerns, I'm more than willing to understand them, but sunshine is the best disinfectant on this one.
Can I clarify, Member Dr. Off?
Sure.
And
Clarify always means you're wrong.
Chairman Novak, it's actually just from a staffing perspective and operational perspective. You're requesting, I think if possible, in advance of June, kind of some content that describes those items that you suggested, Chairman Novak. And then the June session, if we were prepared, would be where we could deliberate on that.
Yeah.
And then an additional summer session as necessary beyond that.
Yep.
Okay, 10-4. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, unless the members have other comments or observations, we can go to public comment. You're on. And let me also make the observation, I think it would be unfair after having conducted a 3-hour meeting, which you have sat patiently through, to constrict you to only 3 minutes. So I'm not gonna give a time restriction, but also will operate under the assumption that you won't.
I promise not to filibuster. Well, cool. Thank you very much, Chairman Novak, and welcome and thanks for taking this on to the new board members. I was really excited in the meeting today to hear how seriously you seem to be taking the role of oversight on this project, and understanding that it's oversight on behalf of the people of Michigan, who, under the public trust doctrine, are the collective owners of the bottomlands and waters that could be impacted, both by the existing Line 5 pipeline and by this plan to build an oil tunnel underneath 20% of the world's fresh surface water. There are many different problems that have been identified with this proposal, dating back to when it was first proposed in 2017. And I think the foundational problem here, I should introduce myself. I'm Sean McBrady, and I'm the Legislative and Policy Director for Clean Water Action, and also the campaign coordinator for Oil and Water Don't Mix, which is a coalition of nonprofits, tribal groups, businesses, and represents over 100,000 residents across Michigan. Now, as I was saying, there are many problems that we've identified with this proposal, but the biggest is that it's built on a lie. Despite what Enbridge's spokespeople say in meetings like this, and what Enbridge's spokespeople say in advertisements that they pay millions of dollars putting up around the state, when they're under oath, their experts tell a very different story about Line 5. Recently, in early December of last year, the case Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa versus Enbridge is a case in federal court in Wisconsin in which the Bad River Band, which Line 5 runs through Bad River territory, the tribe refused to renew Enbridge's easements in 2013. And a federal judge granted summary judgment this fall to the tribe, saying that Enbridge had been trespassing since 2013. In the trial phase, Enbridge had to put, there was a brief trial phase afterwards to determine what the financial penalties for Enbridge should be, and whether or not the judge was going to order the Line 5 pipeline as it currently exists shut down. We're still awaiting judgment in that, but during the trial phase, Enbridge had to put their experts under oath, of course, and under oath, Enbridge's experts agreed that that if the Line 5 pipeline were to shut down immediately, there would be no impact, essentially, to oil or natural gas liquids supply, because other routes already exist or could be made readily available in very short order. And their expert predicted that in such a case that Line 5 would have to be shut down immediately, the largest impact that he could foresee on regional gas prices would be on the order of half a cent a gallon. So it's a very different story then we must have the Line 5 pipeline, so we need to build an oil tunnel through the Great Lakes. And hopefully the Army Corps of Engineers is taking that into consideration in their consideration of need here. Enbridge as a corporation has a pattern and practice of deception with state and federal governments. Point you as well to Minnesota during the construction of Line 3 in 2021. When they were building Line 3, which was a pipeline built entirely over land, they did some HDD drilling underneath rivers. But other than that, this was more of a bread and butter play than building a tunnel underneath the Great Lakes. This was a normal overland pipeline. They had 3 major artesian aquifer breaches caused by Line 3 construction, with a total of over 300 million gallons of water released from the aquifers. They had 28 separate frac outs of drilling mud when they were drilling HDD drilling underneath the rivers. Each of those 28 is a separate violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. So 28 frac outs in the river drilling under rivers in Minnesota, that equates to 63% of the time that they were drilling under rivers, they failed. We should have some oversight before we let them put a drill in the Great Lakes. Now, other concerns, the Michigan Public Service Commission case, I would really encourage, especially the new folks on the board, to read the record in that and read some of the expert testimony that's been provided. An expert, recently a hydrogeologist, testified in that Enbridge testified about the lack of geotechnical study. So the industry standard for geotechnical study for a tunnel in complex geology is to drill one borehole to tunnel depth roughly every 50 to 200 feet. In this case, the geotech is actually about one boring every 950 feet. So it's well short of the geotechnical recommendations from industry. Now, even though they only did that kind of limited research, over half of the rock samples taken were rated fair to very poor as a drilling medium. The porosity of the rock that they discovered was actually closer to the porosity of sand than bedrock, so greater water infiltration should be anticipated. And they also found methane detected in groundwater above reportable limits, which could be a sign of methane pockets in the geology. If they run into an unexpected methane pocket during construction, that can be incredibly hazardous. That can cause an explosion, which could very well impact the operating pipeline running 23 million gallons of oil and gas a day through the Great Lakes on the surface. Not to mention impact the construction of the tunnel and the lives of the people inside that tunnel. Furthermore, the state, through the tunnel agreement in 2018, it contemplated a 99-year lease agreement for this tunnel. But Enbridge filed a request with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 2020, where they actually asked FERC to depreciate the entire Lakehead pipeline system, of which Line 5 is part, by the year 2040. So let's look at a rosy case scenario where they have the permits they need in line to drill by 2025. We're still not looking at completed construction until close to 2030. And just 10 years later, Enbridge has asked FERC to consider their pipeline system worthless because they cited changing climate policy and several other factors in that. So there are many more examples. I don't want to take too much of your time. You've been generous to let me have more than 3 minutes. But there are many more examples of why this project actually needs oversight and what kind of project this needs. And the organizations that make up Oil and Water Don't Mix really want to work with you as stakeholders and as members of the Michigan public to help provide that oversight. We have folks who have been tracking everything happening with Line 5 since the Kalamazoo oil spill. And there's a lot that we can provide. So as you move forward, I'd strongly encourage you to not just hear from Enbridge in an official capacity in your meetings, but to also leave room for the organizations that have been working on this who don't believe a tunnel should be built in the Straits to hear from them and hear our reasoning, in more presentations like you've heard today. Really to let us and also hear from the tribal governments who are impacted here and have unique treaty rights in the Straits of Mackinac, including, and there's testimony about this in the Michigan Public Service Commission case as well, the existence of a potential 10,000-year-old archaeological site at the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac, which could be impacted by tunnel construction. That's currently being investigated by the State Historical Preservation Office, Tribal Historical Preservation Offices, and Army Corps in that process. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, thank you for that comment, or those comments. I just wanted to actually put something out there to Enbridge. I believe, as I just said, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and that I'm receiving now monthly reports as to the status of things. Again, not to categorize or not to characterize anything in a particular way. I was personally surprised by their lack of robustness. 2 pages, quite summary. And I think that to the extent, trust is built and maintained, it's really important for when there is reporting, it to be as detailed as reasonably possible. And again, I understand what phase we're in right now. Nevertheless, I'm very used to receiving, project reports by project owners and construction teams, and they're big. These 2 pages didn't seem big to me, so I would ask your team to consider, to the extent reasonably appropriate under the circumstances, but going forward as well, to give us reports that, are meatier, just for your consideration. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from authority members? All right. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? All right.
Beat the snow.